Last video we left off passing some data from the search screen to the follower list screen, that being the username, so we know what to query. And then we also talked about some text validation, ways to do some checking. Here with this guard statement that you see here, is username entered? We just did a print statement. This video is going to be all about creating this custom alert that you see here. And the reason we're doing this now, I know this seems early in the course to be doing something kind of, secondary, but in the next couple of videos, we're going to start talking about our network calls. And I definitely want to have this error ready for when we start handling all the errors with the networking. Like I want to have this ready because we're going to reuse this custom alert all throughout the app. But before we dive into actually building this thing, let's actually take a step back and talk about should you even do this at all? Again, I want to be very clear. A take-home project, 99% of the time, is not going to require you to do custom alerts, right? This is like extra credit above and beyond. But I want to do it because it's a very common topic that I want to teach. But I also want to talk about the trade-offs, not just the take-home project, right? Take that away. Just building custom elements in just general development. There's always a trade-off. As you see with this, custom alert, it looks a lot better than the Apple system alerts, but that comes with the trade-off. Anytime you build a custom element like this, now you have to maintain it. Now you have to update it. Now you have to constantly make sure it can handle all the different situations that the Apple default system area can already handle, like a cancel button and an OK button, right? So there's trade-offs. Is this alert looking prettier than the system alert, worth all the maintenance and upkeep that you're gonna have to do throughout the life of the app? That answer may be yes, that answer may be no. The point I want to express to you is that anytime you build a custom element, it comes at a cost. It's up to you to decide if that cost is worth it. Now let's talk about actually building this thing, and we're gonna break this down. I'm gonna switch to a light mode version, even though I think the dark mode one looks really cool, because it's easier for us to break down. Because in the light mode version, you can see the transparent background, right? That is the view controller. We're gonna give our view controller a 75% transparent background. The white circle you see, or square, you see, is a container view, just a UI view. You can see we have a title label, a body label, and then a GF button that we've already created. So that's the basic structure. We're basically creating one simple view. But we're also going to take the opportunity to create some reusable views that we're going to reuse later on in the app. And that is the GF title label, and then also the GF body label. So we're going to create those custom elements right now. So go over to your GH followers folder, do Command N, again, for a new file. Cocoa Touch class is going to be a UI label, and it's again going to be GF title label. And I like to name these, like I said, generic, rather than GF error title label. I guess you could do that, but because we're going to reuse this anywhere there's a title in the app, I want to keep it generic. And go ahead and create it. And again, if you're worried about all these files on the left and how we're going to organize it, we're going to do that in the next video. So we're going to do the typical init stuff. I'm going to go through this a little quicker because this is now the third custom object we've created, and we're going to create a bunch more. But we do our typical init, right? Init with frame, super.init, passing the frame of frame. And now we're going to get yelled at, right, for our custom initializer, or required initializer. Again, remember, this is the quote-unquote storyboard initializer. And what we're going to do right away with the GF title label is we're going to create our custom initializer, because sometimes the title label is aligned left, sometimes it's centered, like in this error message. Align left would be the example of the user info screen that you see here. And then also the size. We're going to pass in a font size. This is an example of when we're not going to use dynamic type. So this is kind of the nuance. I'm going to give you my thought process behind the decision. Whether you agree with it or not, that's fine. Our titles, anything in a GF title label, is always going to be big and bold. So I'm not worried about dynamic type getting bigger or smaller. We always want it big and bold. On the other hand, when we do the GF body label, which is in the error message of the alert view, or in our user info view, the bio, right? That's a lot of text. When it comes to that, I want that to conform to dynamic type. So you can kind of see the nuance of when to use it, when not to use it. Again, at least in this circumstance. So with that said, the custom initializer, let's do init. We want to pass in a text alignment, because again, we're going to pass in .center or .left, whatever it is. And that is going to be an NS text alignment. You see there. And then we're going to pass in a size. But instead of just size, because this is an initializer on the overall label, right? This could mean what size is the label? That's kind of confusing. This is where naming matters a bit. So I'm going to call this actually font size, just to be specific, so we know what we're passing in. And that is going to be a CG float. And then with the initializers, we do self.text alignment. Equals text alignment. And remember, the reason I have to do self here is because they're named exactly the same. So if I don't designate this one with self, it doesn't know which one I'm talking about. Another way to fix this is to not name them the exact same thing, but neither here nor there. Oh, I forgot to call the super init. That's right. Super.init with the frame of .0, like we've done before. And then now I want to set the font on my label. So self.font. I don't have to put the self in there, but it looks weird having one with self and one without self. So self.font equals UI font. And again, we're not going to do the preferred font type because that's where we get the dynamic type. We're just going to do system font of size and weight. So the size is going to be the size we pass in, font size. And then the weight, we're going to do dot bold. Here's where you can see you can do heavy, light, medium, regular, semi-bold, thin, right? There's a whole bunch of weights you can do, but we're going to do bold, again, because we always want our titles to be big and bold. That's the design choice we went with. So now that we have that custom initializer, we need to just write the configure function that we've been writing in the other one. So func configure. And before we, private, I'm sorry, we got to make this private because we don't want to call configure again out in the wild, only within this file. So let's make sure we call configure here and then configure after the custom initializer here. So now let's talk about like how we want to configure our title labels. So the first thing we want to do is set the text color, and that is going to be equals dot label. Remember, dot label is just black on a light screen and white on a dark screen. And then adjust font size to fit width. We do want to set that to true. And again, what this does is, because our title labels are only going to be one line. So, if it's a super long username, for example, it'll shrink a little bit to try to fit in that label. And here we can tell it how much we want it to shrink with the minimum scale factor. We're going to do 0.90, 90%. So it'll shrink a little bit, but not too much. And just based on our design, whoops, I got to do 0. You can do 0.9. Tested this out on a design that seems to work. Again, you can scale this however you like to. What I just found is on the big title labels, if you let it go down to like 60 or 70%, then it looks like really, really small and doesn't even look like a title anymore. But again, you can mess with this. And then let's talk about the line break mode. So this is how, if it does become too big, how does it break the line? And we're going to do by truncating tail. So what this means is if the username is too long, it's just going to break it off by like ... after it shrinks it down to 90%. There's other ways you can do it by like word wrapping. So if your label was multi-line, this is how you word wrap the label. Again, our title labels are only one line. We don't want to mess with word wrapping. So we're just going to do that. And then do the constraints. Translates auto masking constraints and equals false. And then we will line these up. I'm not going to line it up all the way with the constraint one because that's like kind of pretty far out there. Again, you don't have to line up your equal signs. It's totally my preference, and I am pretty flexible with it. Which is not consistent. I know, I get it. Anyway, this is our GF title label. So here you go. Again, as you see here in the image, it's going to give us that title that you see in the alert. The next label we're going to build is the GF body label. And again, these are labels that we're going to use throughout the app. So back to the GH followers, Command N. And like I said, I'm picking up the pace a little bit on these custom objects because, we've done 4 of these now and we're going to do many, many more. So you're going to get practice. So GF body label. And here's where the good and the bad, right, comes into play when you do your UI programmatically. So you get a lot of copying and pasting powers, right? When you configure a label and all that stuff via storyboard, you can't really copy and paste that. However, here you can, but with great power comes great responsibility. Copy paste errors are a thing, and they're actually pretty hard to debug. So just be very, very careful. But we're going to walk through this. So I just copy and pasted our whole title label. We got our override init. That's the same. Our required init is the same. That's the storyboard. Our custom initializer is going to be different because our body text label is going to use dynamic type. So we're not going to pass in a font size because we're going to use the preferred font that you'll see. We'll get to it in a second. So just remove this font here that we are no longer passing in. We still want to pass in a text alignment because again, as you can see on this custom alert, it's a center alignment. In our bio on the user info screen, it's a line left. So we definitely want to pass in a text alignment when we configure this label. Now, if we go down to the configure, our text color is not dot label, right? As you see in the alert, it's like a gray, light gray. Well, there's a color called secondary label, which is going to be this light gray. And again, if you want to see where I got those, remember that Semantic UI app. I love that app. Definitely put it on your phone. Like I said, you're going to use it a ton. We want to adjust the content size to fit width for sure. We want to be a little more forgiving with our body text because, right, like as you see, there's a lot more text here. So I'm going to take this down, let it go down to 75% of the size to make sure it fits. Line break mode is going to be by word wrapping, right? because we're not just going to truncate the tail, we're actually going to wrap it around. And you're going to notice I'm not actually setting the number of lines. You may have done this in Storyboard where you set the number of lines to a label to 0 or to maybe 5 to set that. I'm actually going to save that bit of configuration for when I actually use the label, because depending on the situation, it could be different. I don't want to always hard code my body labels to always be 4 lines of text, right? You don't know when you're going to use these. So by not including that in this configure, I can configure that again in the view controller. But it's better to configure one little thing than all of this. So the last thing we need to do in this configure after we kind of adjusted all the existing ones is to put the font. Remember we had the font for the text label up here. Well, now we're going to do font equals UI font. Now we're going to go back to the preferred font for text style, right? This is where we're getting that dynamic type. And there is a text style called body. Imagine that. So that is going to be the size that you see. Again, the Semantic UI app will show you that. So now we have our body label. Back to the design. Now we have our title label, we have our body label, and we have our GF button. Like, we're ready to go. So we need to create the view controller, because again, the alert is going to be a view controller that's presented. So do Command-N on your GitHub followers folder, Cocoa Touch class, back to a UI view controller. And this is going to be the GF alert, if I can't type, alert VC. Hit next, create, add it to the pile of files. Again, we're going to fix it. And delete all the comments as usual. Now back to kind of some of the other screens we built. I like to initialize my objects in order. And the first thing we want is that white container view. Well, at least in light mode, it's white. So let container view, and this is just going to be a normal UI view. I haven't made because obviously this is the only place we use it, but I haven't made a reusable container view yet, like a GF alert container view. That is something I'm going to leave if you choose to kind of take it on your own and build that. Because one of the feedback I've gotten early in the course is they would love some homework, a little bit exercises, some extra stuff for you to do on your own. So I'm going to try to start, sprinkling that in throughout the videos here. And this is an example of one of them. So now we want the title label. Again, I like to go top to bottom. So let title label equal GF title label that we just created. And we're going to initialize this with the text alignment. Text alignment is .center. And the font size is 20. Now remember, I've already like dialed these numbers in. It did take some trial and error to find out what numbers worked best. Let body, we'll say message label. Like error message is probably a better way. Message label equal GF body label. And again, text alignment .center. And then now the button. So let action button. Again, I like the generic names there instead of like the OK button or something like that, because again, the name can change. Equals GF button, again with our custom initializer. This time the color is going to be .system pink. I know it looks red, but I just like the way the system pink looks. It kind of looks red. Anyway, and then the title string is going to be OK. We're actually going to create a custom initializer on this where we pass in the title. So that's just kind of hard coded in there for now. So you can see we have our UI elements. We're going to go down later to actually, do all the constraints like we did with the search VC. But first, because of that custom initializer that I talked about, right? Because when we initialize this alert and call this from any view controller, right? Because you imagine any view controller should be able to show an error. We're going to pass in what the title should be, what the message should be, and what the button should say. That's going to happen at the call site. So because of that, I'm going to need those variables. For example, var, I can't just call it title because every view controller has a title, right? That's what shows up in the nav bar. So we're going to call this alert title, and it's going to be a string. And then we need a var message. That is also a string, not a sting. And then var button title. That's also a string. So now let's create that custom init. So just like the other objects, init, we want to pass in a title, which is a string. We want to pass in a message, which is a string, and then a button title, which is a string. And we got to call the super, so super.init. And when you're initializing these view controllers programmatically like this, you need it doesn't have a nib, and there's no nib in the bundle. So now we set these variables to what we passed in. Just again, similar to our other custom initializers. So self.alert title equals title, self.message equals message, and self.button title equals button title. And we line these up because that's what we do. Okay, so now that we have our initializer, that's all done and good to go. Okay, we need our required init for the storyboard init. Yep, got it. And give us 2 spaces here. Now we're ready to start kind of laying out the UI. The first thing we need to do in view to load is set the view background color. Again, if you look at the design, you can see that the background view is a black, but it's at a 75% opacity. So we need to do view.background color. And again, another little bit of homework for you. If you want to put this color into a constant, you'll see how we do that later in the course. You can do that. This was the only instance of this color, so I just went ahead and initialized it just as a UI color. But again, you never know. You might want to reuse it. So this is just 0, 0, 0, black is 0, and then the opacity is 0.75. So that's what's going to give us that 75% alpha opacity, same thing. So that's what we're doing there. And now we can start configuring the elements on the screen individually, just like we did with the search VC. So again, we're going to start with the container view, the white square that holds everything, because that is going to go in the view controller, but the title label, the body label, the button, that's actually going to go into the container view. And you'll see how we do that, because before we've been pinning everything to the view. So now we're going to kind of get some hierarchy, if you will. So func configure container view. And again, this is the opportunity if you would like to create a GF alert container view and refactor that all, so you have it, similar to this. That's the homework should you choose to do it. And you're going to see me kind of lay out some of the stuff in here, and you can kind of see why I like to refactor those out, because it gets a lot of this configuration code out of your view controller. So what's the first thing we do? You remember? We got to add the subview. Don't forget this. I guarantee you're going to do it. View.add subview is going to be the container view. And now we're going to start breaking down the corner radius and then the border. So container view, actually, container view dot layer dot corner radius equals 16. And again, these are numbers I've dialed in. Container view dot layer dot border width equals 2. And the reason this has a border, like look on the white version, like you don't see the border because the border color is going to be white. But what happened is because the black transparency on dark mode and then like the black background, like it blended in too much. So we're giving this a white border. So in dark mode, the alert really pops against the black background as you see here in the design. So container view dot layer dot border color equals, remember we have to do the full UI color dot white dot CG color for core graphics. This is because we're dealing with the layer of the view. It's kind of like a level down. And then lastly, we do the container view dot translate auto whatever into false. It's a mouthful. So we do that into false there, and then line these up. So that is our UI for the container view. Now let's start doing the constraints for the container view. And then I forgot the background color. Container view dot background color equals, and again it's going to be dot system background. Right, because we want it to be white in light mode and black in dark mode. So now that we have the UI all set up, and again, so if you were to refactor this, all this functionality here would be refactored out into your GF alert container view, if you choose to call it that. And then you would just get right into the constraints, which we're going to do now. So remember ns layout constraint dot activate, and we pass in an array of constraints. Which again, remember the rule of thumb is we want to do about 4 constraints per item. Again, that's a rule of thumb. There are some exceptions. So let's think about this. Look at this design here and let's see how we want to position this. So looking at this, we know we want it dead center of the screen. So let's take care of that first. So container view dot center y anchor dot constraint is going to be equal to view dot center y anchor. So again, we're centering it vertically. We do the same thing horizontally. Container view dot center x anchor dot constraint equal to view dot center x anchor. So again, now we're centered vertically and horizontally. And now we're going to give it a hard-coded height and width. So container view dot height, or we'll do width first. Width. Can't do that. Width anchor dot constraint equal to, and this is going to be 280. Again, I've dialed in these numbers. Now remember, The smallest width is going to be 320 on the iPhone SE. Remember, we talked about the kind of the diagrams, but it's just an error message. Like, you never really want it to span the entire width. Like, imagine like the big wide iPhone X Plus. You know me and my naming. You don't want it to span that. So I think having a hard-coded height and width here is good. And to be fair, you probably could go above and beyond to really make this custom and have the height kind of adapt to the height of the error message. But ideally, your error messages shouldn't be like a paragraph long, like, right? They should be very short and concise. But that would be one way you can take this, more above and beyond. Constraint equal to, and then height is 220. Again, I've dialed in these numbers. So now let's just call configure container view. That's the first element. So now from here on out, we are going to put the title label, the body label, and the button inside the container view. So let's do the title label. Same thing, func.configure title label. And then remember, we want to add the sub view, except this time we're not adding it to the view, right? We're adding the sub view to the container view. So there's some view hierarchy stuff you got to worry about here. So we're going to do container view.add sub view, and that is going to be title label. So now little curveball, gets a little trickier. And then all the UI is configured, right? We did that in the subclass of the GF title label. So now we just need to set what the actual text is. So title label.text equals, it's going to be what? Alert title. Remember, this is what we passed in. And if for some reason, right, this is an optional, maybe for some reason they don't use this custom initializer, they use another initializer, we can put at least a default setting in there. So we're going to do alert title, and then the double question mark is called nil coalescing. It's another way to unwrap optionals. Basically what this says is use alert title. If alert title is nil, use this, and you give it a default value. So this would be a blank string. We're just going to type in something went wrong. So when this alert shows up, like something went wrong, right? So this is kind of like our default backup title, if need be. But we want to, hopefully it's always going to use the alert title. That's the plan anyway. So that's it for UI alignment. Now let's get into the constraints. So let's do ns layout constraint.activate. Again, we're passing in the array. I like to use four items here. So we're going to pin it to the top here. Title label dot top anchor dot constraint is now it's equal to, we want to pass in a constant here. So it's going to be equal to, again, this is where we were normally pinning it to like the view, but now we're pinning it to the container view. So again, if you've done your layout in Storyboard, you're doing the same thing. Just like when you're pinning stuff in Storyboard, you're just typing it out. So it's not much different. So we want to make this equal to the container view dot top anchor, and we want to give it a constant of 20. Again, I've dialed in these numbers. So title label dot leading anchor dot constraint is equal to container view dot leading anchor and the constant of 20. And title label dot trailing anchor dot constraint, again that, and container view dot trailing anchor, and then remember trailing we'll do -20. Now we're going to do something real quick after we do in the height. So again, we got a pin to the top, we got a pin to the sizes, so we got our X coordinate and our width. Now we just need a height, and we're going to just hard code the height because again, the title label is just one line. We know our font size is 20, so we're going to just give ourselves a little bit of padding, but for the most part, we're going to hard code it. So title label dot height anchor dot constraint is equal to constant 28. Now you're going to notice here, we have a style going on in this alert. We have 20 from the top, 20 from the left, 20 from the right, or the trailing. And we're going to do that with all of our elements. It's kind of like padding. If you've ever built like a website in HTML and CSS, right? You have certain padding values. So that's what we're going to do. We're going to create a variable. We're going to say let padding equal, padding, it's got to be, you got to tell it it's a CG float, equals 20. So now I have this variable called padding, a constant that I'm just going to pass in. And the benefit here is, say we want to change our design. We want to change this padding to like 10, right? We want to make it smaller. Well, instead of changing, because you're going to see we're going to use this 20 padding like a lot. Instead of changing that in 9 different places, you just come up and change this padding variable right there to whatever you need. And you can quickly tweak your design. So now you're going to see we're going to have padding, and we're going to be reusing this in the other elements too. Now this one, remember, is negative padding. Be sure to keep the negative there. That's a big one. So now we have our title label. And if we do that, let's go configure title label. So if you see what we've done, we've placed the container view in the view controller, and now we've placed our title label in the container view pinned to the top. So now I'm actually going to mix it up a little bit. I know I said I like to go top to bottom, so after title label should be body label. But however, if you look at the design, like we know that the title label is always pinned to the top. We know we want our button to always be kind of pinned to the bottom with the padding. So that just leaves the space in between. So what I want to do is I want to pin the button to the bottom and then have the body label just fill up the space in between those. Now, the thing with programmatic UI, like the order matters. So if I tried to add my body label and configure all the constraints right now, and then do my button, like I would get an error because I'm trying to configure my body label to a button that hasn't been configured yet. So the order in which your constraints are applied matters. And because of that, we need to configure the button next, because we're going to pin that to the bottom. So func configure action button. And again, more of the same. We have to do container view dot add subview action button. Remember I said we're going to get a lot of practice at constraints? Well, here we are. And we got to give our button its title. So action button dot set title. And now it's going to be button title, right? That's what we passed in the custom initializer up here. So the button title, and again, we're going to use no coalescing. So again, the backup is okay. And that is going to be for control state normal. And then we got to give our button a target, right? Because what happens when you tap the button? Well, all of our errors, again, this is just kind of the basic alert, right? We don't have the functionality to have like, a cancel, an OK button to do like different actions. Our OK button is just going to be to dismiss the error. Like we're going to show the error, like, okay, I know, hit OK. Again, this is what I talked about at the cost of creating the custom stuff. Because when you use the default Apple one, you get all that like done, cancel, all the customization of that alert is already built in with Apple. You don't have to build your own. So again, is the nice looking alert worth the cost for you to decide? So we have to give this a title, or action, or a target. Action button dot set or add target. This is adding an action. It's going to be self hashtag selector, and then you see we need that Odell Beckham Objective C method again. So we're going to write that real quick down here. It's going to be dismiss VC, because it's just gonna, when you hit OK, it's just gonna dismiss this view controller. And then this looks a bit redundant. I get it, but we want to do this because we want to pass in animated is true, and then we don't need the completion handler here, so we're not doing this. The reason I have animated is true is because here later on we're going to implement how this view shows up, right? Remember we talked about it earlier, how it's not a modal that slides up. We're just going to make this appear. Well, we want it to be animated, and we're going to do this like cross dissolve animation, so it looks like it fades in. So we definitely want to see this animation here. So I call dismiss VC there, and then this is for for .touch up inside. Okay, so that is our targets on the. Oh, whoops. Yep. See, there's the error. I got to do @objc, and there we go. So now we are ready for our constraints on the button. So ns layout constraint dot activate. And again, we're going to start with the bottom because that's where we're pinning it to. So action button dot bottom anchor dot constraint is equal to that and a constant. So that's equal to container view dot bottom. And then the float is going to be negative padding, right? Remember I say we're going to be using this padding a lot. We're also going to use this on the trailing and leading for the button as well. So action button dot leading anchor dot constraint equal to container view dot leading, and then it's going to be padding. Right now you can see why when I just go and change the padding up top, if I want to adjust it a little bit, it's all going to work out there. Oh, need a comma. Again, these are an array you're passing in, so make sure you add those commas. So action button dot trailing anchor dot constraint equal to, I don't know why that moves around sometimes, container view dot trailing, and remember it's negative padding. And then now we got to give the button a height. Action button dot height anchor dot constraint equal to 44. All right, you feel like you're getting enough practice on these constraints now? It is tedious, I know, when you do the whole layout, but I'm starting to really like the programmatic layout. Even though my projects are still a mix of storyboard and UI, I don't know, I like doing them both. So now we have our action button. Let's be sure we call that configure action button. And now let's do the body label, the final piece of the puzzle here. So func configure body label, container view dot add subview, and that is going to be body label. I'm sorry, message label. Message label. We do need to do a little bit of configuration here by setting the number of lines. Remember I talked about that, how I want to do that at the call site because every situation is going to be different. First, let's set the text here. Message label.text. Again, same thing what we did before with we want it to be message, or give it a default value of unable to complete request. It is a generic message to the user, but it's better than sending them nothing or having it crash, right? Now we do the message label, like I was saying, number of lines, and I'm going to set that equal to 4. Because again, I know I've written my error messages, so like they're not super long. Okay, so that is it for the UI configuration of the message label. Back to the UI and the constraints. So ns layout constraint dot activate, and we get 4 constraints here. And so we want to pin this to the bottom of the title label, and then also the top of the button, and then the leading and trailing edges of the content view. So message label dot top anchor dot constraint is, this one, equal to title label dot bottom anchor, and then the constant is going to be 8. Again, I've dialed these in. Message label dot leading anchor dot constraint is equal to that, and is going to be equal to the container view dot leading anchor, and there's going to be padding, right? We want that 20 padding all around. Message label dot trailing anchor dot constraint. Nope. See, I picked the wrong one. That's what I said. I wish the default auto completion, it moves around. That's kind of annoying. Container view dot leading anchor equals negative padding. I'm sorry, this is trailing anchor. Yes. Again, sometimes when you're doing so many of these constraints, like you can do those typos like that because it's very repetitive and tedious. And by the way, there are like third-party libraries out there like SnapKit or Tiny Constraints that make this less tedious. But again, we're going no third-party libraries. So again, we're pinned to the top, we're pinned to the edges. Now we need to pin to the top of the button. So message label dot bottom anchor dot constraint equal to, sorry, it's always tricky picking the right one, action button dot top anchor, right? Because we're pinning it to the top of the action button. And again, -12 when you're dealing with negative when you're dealing with the bottom anchor, and 12 is the number that I have dialed in. And now if we call configure action button, body label, or what do we call it? That should be configure message label. Again, confusing naming. It's called a body label, but this is the message label. I got confused there. So again, make sure the naming is on point. Message label. So we have the general UI all set up. Now we need to figure out how are we going to call this? So like I said before, we're going to be using this custom initializer, but we want to do this on every view controller. So this is where an extension on UI view controller comes into play. This is going to be our first extension. And sometimes you want to subclass something, like sometimes you want to create a special type of view controller that has certain behaviors. That would be a subclass. However, when you have a behavior that you want on every view controller or anything, like maybe every button, you want to have this one pulsate animation, then you make an extension on UI button. So that's the difference between extensions and subclassing. A subclass is more for a specific subset of buttons you want to have a behavior. An extension is when you want all UI buttons to have a behavior. So again, followers folder, Command N, add it to the stack of files here. We're just gonna do a Swift file, call this UI view controller. So what I do here for my extensions is I type out the full name of the type, and then I do a plus and then ext. So I know this is my UI view controller extension. Add it to the pile of files, like I said. So we're going to import UIKit. And by the way, importing UIKit also imports Foundation. So if you find yourself importing Foundation and UIKit, it's redundant. I used to do that all the time. So now we want to do an extension on UI view controller. So we'll create that. And now we're going to put in the behavior to show this alert controller. So now in any view controller, I can just call this function and it will show the alert. Okay, we're going to call present, because remember, this is modally, we're presenting it. If it was like a navigation controller, would be like pushing it. So present GF alert on main thread. This is going to be the key here, on main thread. We're going to talk about threading more when we get to the our networking calls, but this is a big deal because oftentimes you're calling these alerts, again, back to the network calls. When you go to make this call, you're calling it from the background thread, and it's illegal to present a UI element from the background thread. So if I didn't put this actually in the function call here, if I just called this present GF alert and we didn't do it on the main thread here, every time I called this, which again, when we're showing errors is like every screen, I would have to wrap it in like moving it to the main thread. And that gets annoying. So we're gonna actually just do it here. So it's always going to be presented on the main thread. And again, if you're not familiar with main thread and background thread, we're going to talk more about that when we do our networking. And like I said, when we present this, we're going to want to pass in the title, which is a string, the message, which again is a string, and the button title. This way we have complete control over what we show on our alert, like when we present it at the call site. So here's where we're going to wrap this to put it on the main thread. So dispatch queue, man, call it a function, right? It's kind of tricky to like talk and type at the same time. Anyway, dispatch queue.main.async. This is a quick way to throw things onto the main thread. Like I said, if I didn't do this here, I would have to call this every time I called this function, which is a lot with all the error handling. So now this is actually very similar to when we passed data in the last video. So we create the view controller. So let alert VC equal a GF alert VC. And if you see, we do the initializer here, we get our custom initializer that we created, where we pass in a title string, message, all that stuff. And we're just going to pass through what we passed here originally. So this is going to be title, message, and button title. So we're just passing it through into here. So now we've created the alert VC. Now we need to configure it. Alert VC dot present. Modal presentation style. Modal presentation style equals dot, and you can see this is how you can, present this. We're going to do over full screen, and you see here it says a view presentation style in which it's presented. The presented view covers the screen, and we're doing that so it doesn't show like the card view, especially in iOS 13. And now we need to do alert vc.modal transition style. Now here's the animation, right? You know how like we'll do this here: cross vertical, cross dissolve, flip horizontal, partial curl. There's a couple different types. We want to do cross dissolve. So this is going to make it look like, so it like fades in, right? It's not just going to flash on the screen. The alert is going to have a quick fade in when we show it. It's a lot smoother that way. And then again, very similar to how we passed the data before. Now we're going to call, instead of navigation controller.push like we did in the last video, we're going to do just present, and then you pass in a view controller to present, which is the alert VC. And animated is true because we want to see that cross dissolve animation. And then we can just get rid of the completion handler because we're not doing anything once it completes. So now every view controller, self, because we're in a closure here. And by the way, these GCD closures and stuff like that, you don't have to do the capture list, the weak self. We're going to get into that whole weak self here later. But these GCD ones and the UIView.animate closures, you don't have to do the weak self stuff 99% of the time. There's always edge cases. But so now any view controller can just call present GF alert on main thread. You pass in the title, you pass in the message, you pass in the button title, and you're good to go. So let's see this thing in action, right? We've coded a lot. We haven't seen anything. So back to our search VC, right, where we had this print no username. So what we're doing here is, when we press go or get followers, we want to check to make sure, is username entered? And if username is not entered, instead of printing no username, we're just going to call present GF alert on main thread. The title is going to be empty username. And the message is going to be, please enter a username. We need to know who to look for. Smiley face emoji. By the way, Command Control Spacebar will pull up your emoji keyboard. And there we go. You don't have to do that, obviously. We're just going to have a little fun. And then the button title, again, is going to be okay. So now that will present our alert. So let's test it. We're going to run it on the iPhone 11. All right, here we go. I'm going to tap Get Followers when I have an empty username. And you see there's our alert. Please enter your username. We need to know who to look for. Okay, now let's test it on dark mode real quick. Side note, if you didn't know, when your app is running, if you click this little control thing, environment overrides, click on that, you're gonna see you can change it to dark mode on the fly. You can switch between light and dark. So we wanna go back to dark mode. So let's pull back our simulator. Now we're in dark mode. So now you can see what our alert looks like in dark mode. Again, we're gonna hit Get Followers. Let me move this over here now. And then now you see that white border. So you see what I was talking about. If we didn't have that white border, that error message would really blend in with that, black transparency background. So we put that white border on there to make it really pop in dark mode. I really like the way that looks. So again, please enter username. We need to know who to look for. And you can see how the colors and the label all configure in dark mode automatically. And then again, remember when you tap OK, that calls that dismiss view controller. You saw it do that, watch it like slowly animate in, that slow cross dissolve out. If we didn't have that cross dissolve modal transition style, it would just flash away and flash on. Pretty jarring. So we wanted to slowly fade away. But that's it. That's our custom alert. You're looking at it. Like I said, we're going to use this a lot throughout the rest of the app. I wanted to get this in place before we did our networking because we're going to use it a lot in the networking stuff. So on to the next video where we kind of organize these files.